Welcome to Part 5 of Ridgewood. Visit brooksaudiobooks.com for an awesome collection of unique, full-length audiobooks. And be sure to subscribe to be notified when new books are released. Chapter 17. The night came with its share of alarms. Every sound in the woods startled the vigilant sentinel, and as we all learn when we find ourselves awake and on high alert, night is filled with noises, not just in the woods, but in our homes as well. Throughout that night, each of the boys felt as though there were more unexplainable sounds than ever before. Crackling noises like dry twigs snapping underfoot, the shuffle of footsteps, heavy breathing, and countless other noises that at that moment seemed to indicate the stealthy approach of some foe. Finally, morning broke, and the camp had remained unharmed. At breakfast, it was decided that this day would be dedicated solely to fortifying their position, as security seemed a greater priority than escaping the island. Through diligent effort, they made significant progress, erecting a line of tall, leaning pickets that wrapped around more than half of the camp. This at least lessened the area they had to keep watch over during the night, and since the evening passed quietly with no sign of danger, they unanimously agreed the next morning that Sunday would be a day of rest, believing that finishing the stockade was no longer an urgent task. However, during Sunday night, the boys would have reason to reconsider this view. Around 2 o'clock, Tom, who was on duty at the time and armed with a hefty club, awakened his friends, whispering urgently, "Get up, quick! There's someone out there." The two sleeping boys sprang to their feet, grabbed their clubs, and joined Tom outside the hut. As a precaution, the boys had gathered a good number of sturdy, thick clubs that could serve effectively as projectiles. Thrown violently from the hand, the makeshift clubs were likely to prove much more useful than stones or bricks would have been had they been available. Armed with these blunt instruments, the boys peered and listened intently. For a time they heard nothing. Then a low growl echoed from the bushes, followed immediately by the sound of a sharp blow. Clearly, one of the squatters was lurking around the camp, and when his dog growled, he struck it to keep it quiet. The boys remained silent and waited, but no further sounds came. Finally, in a hushed tone, Tom said, "There can't be more than one of them here." "I guess not," Sam replied, "but let's stay quiet and see what he's up to." Everything fell silent again. From their hiding place, the boys knew they could not be seen by anyone in the bushes, giving the prowler every reason to think they were asleep. After what felt like an hour of waiting, Sam whispered, "I see him. He's crawling on his stomach towards the fire. SHH, let's find out what he wants." The man was only a shadowy figure until he reached the fire and picked up a smoldering brand, blowing on it to ignite the ember. The light revealed his face, and the sight was anything but pleasant for the boys. They beheld a figure of untamed humanity, as unappealing as they could have imagined. He was a short, rugged-looking black man, a type rarely seen outside the coasts of northeast Carolina and Georgia. Standing at about 5 feet 2 inches tall, he had a small, flat head, muscular arms and torso, and short legs, with only a makeshift sack worn as a shirt that had holes for his head and arms. His brow was so low and receding that his eyes seemed to bulge out from it. His nose was flattened, as if it had stretched to cover more of his face. His thick lips were a poor fit for his prominent teeth, giving him an appearance more akin to a wild animal than a rational human. Once he ensured that his brand was sufficiently hot, he crept a few steps closer, revealing his intention to ignite the stack of planks meant for the boat's construction. "Quick now," Sam shouted. "Let's pelt him with clubs and charge." It was hardly a moment before the boys sprang into action. Standing less than 20 feet away, each boy hurled a club at the intruder, and then, grabbing another club with both hands, they rushed toward him. The man rose and knocked Sam to the ground, but Henry's club brought him down to his knees. At that instant, the man's dog, a grim-looking beast, lunged at Henry, and it took all 3 boys to fend it off. Sam was up again in a heartbeat, joining the effort to drive the animal away. While they focused on the dog, the man, realizing he was outmatched, turned and fled, and the dog, yelping in pain, quickly followed. "Are you hurt, Henry?" was the first thing asked once they were free to consider their own safety. "I've got a pretty nasty bite," he replied, "but thankfully it's on the fleshy part of my thigh and the skin's not torn. One of you must have hit that dog really quickly, or I would have been in worse shape." "Look," he said, as the fire roared to life. "The beast sank his teeth into me, but let go without shaking me." "I saw him leap at you and tried to stop him before he caught you," Tom replied. "I must have hit him just as he got a hold on you, too late to save you completely, but I did land a good punch on his head." "And he had to let go to howl," Henry added, his spirits lifted despite the pain from their encounter. "By the way, are you hurt, Sam?" "I've got an earache," Sam said, tilting his head to reveal a red, swollen ear. "But I'm just glad that brute didn't land a clean hit on my face like he intended. I think that would have put an end to my photography for good. If I had caught that punch, my nose would have been all over my face just like his." "You look serious, Tom," Henry remarked. "Are you hurt too?" "No, but I'm thinking." "Well, spit it out. What's on your mind?" "Just that we're really in for it now." "In for what?" "War. War." "Yes, you don't really think we're going to have peace with the squatters now, do you? They'll come at us in numbers, just as surely as the sun rises and sets." "Well, I think at least one of them got enough of us as it is," Henry said. "Very possible," Tom replied. "But now he's going to want to retaliate. I bet he'll gather all his buddies for the next round." "I don't understand what we've done that they should bother us." "Oh, you do. That's because you're not seeing things from their perspective. When we first arrived, they didn't mind us at all. They liked our coffee, flour, and bacon, helped themselves, but they didn't object to our presence in the least. Once we had given them everything we could spare, they left us alone. But when they realized we were taking rice from what they claimed was their field, they saw things differently and began to object. You managed to evade the one who chased you, but he ended up hurting himself in the process. That just added to our troubles, and the man who was here tonight decided he would get back at us by burning us out. He's been through quite a beating and won't easily forget it. He'll rally his friends, and we need to look after ourselves, because I can guarantee we won't receive any mercy if they catch us." "You're absolutely right, Tom," Sam replied. "We really need to be cautious now. It's almost morning, so let's eat breakfast right away and get an early start. We need to be prepared for those guys when they show up." Chapter 18. Breakfast wrapped up before dawn that morning, and once the meal was over, the three friends returned to work on their fortification. Tom took a brief break to catch some shrimps for dinner, but aside from that, there were no interruptions in the morning's labor. By the time they gathered for dinner, the boys were both worn out and famished. They continued their efforts just as diligently in the afternoon, and as night fell, the fort, though still incomplete, was well on its way to being secure. "All right," said Tom when it was time for supper. "I think we've had enough shrimp for now, and oysters too. I'm heading out with the net tonight to catch some fish for tomorrow. What do you two want to do?" "I'm going to make some more clubs," said Henry. "We've got something resembling a fort now, and the next step is to stock up on ammo." "Speaking of which," Tom said, "why can't we make some better weapons?" "Like what?" Sam asked. "Well, like bows and arrows. We can craft arrowheads from some of our copper bolts, and they're weapons worth having. What are you grinning at, Henry?" "Oh, nothing. I was just thinking how useful bows and arrows would be without bowstrings." Tom's expression fell, but then he grinned along with his friends and acknowledged that his idea hadn't been fully thought through. "I could make some blowguns from the canes," he suggested, "but they wouldn't be very effective. I've managed to take down birds with them, but I've tested them plenty, and they barely shoot hard enough to drive an arrowhead into a pine board, so they wouldn't serve our needs." "Yeah," Sam agreed. "I think we're going to have to accept that we're left with just our clubs for most situations, relying on the axe, hatchet, and digging tools only as a last resort. Using those means we're aiming to kill, and that's obviously not what we want." "Right, exactly. We just want to defend ourselves and ensure those squatters leave us alone. We don't want to cause those poor creatures any unnecessary harm. With that, Tom took the net and set off in search of fish. Once he was gone, Sam said, "Henry, let's build a platform to defend ourselves." "I'm not sure I follow," Henry replied. "Look, the stockade is 10 feet high and slopes outward, which makes it tough to climb. But that doesn't mean it's impossible, especially if someone has the time to make a couple of poles to climb on. My idea is that we need to be ready to stop anyone who tries that. We should build a kind of platform around the inside of the stockade, about 6 feet off the ground. It doesn't need to be fancy, just a line of poles leaning against the stockade, held up by some forked stakes. Then we can stand on these poles and see over the top of the stockade. If anyone tries to climb up, we can push them back from there. On the ground inside, we'd be nearly defenseless. It will take us no more than half an hour to set this up." "That sounds smart," Henry said, "and we'll need that platform more tonight than at any other time." "Why that?" "Because if those guys plan to attack us, they'll do it right away. If we make it through tonight, we probably won't be attacked again." "I'm not so sure about that," Sam responded. "In fact, I think they'll leave us alone tonight because they'll assume we're on guard. They don't want to get hurt, and when they do come, they'll try to catch us off guard. At least that's what I think." "So you believe they'll attack us later this week or next?" "Yes, any time except tonight. They'll wait for us to convince ourselves that they aren't coming at all." "Well then, that teaches us that we mustn't decide in that direction at all." "Exactly. We need to stay as vigilant 2 weeks from now as we are today if we're going to be here that long. But come on, let's get to work." The boys began by cutting forked stakes, which didn't need to be driven deep into the ground since they would be leaned against the sloping stockade. They set them in place and laid poles between them, stretching the line all the way around the enclosure. It was easy to walk along these poles all around, and standing on them, the boys' shoulders were above the top of the stockade. Near the water, they created entrances on each side of the stockade, using a movable piece of timber with a notch and a brace behind it to secure each gate. When closed and fastened from the inside, the gates were as secure as any other part of the fortress. Sam's prediction that the enemy would not show up on Monday night turned out to be true. The entire week passed in quiet. Having made their fortress reasonably secure, the boys returned to work on the boat on Monday and continued throughout the week, dedicating only half of each day to that task and the other half to fortifying their stronghold. The posts had initially been set 6 inches apart to speed up the construction, but this was never meant to be a permanent arrangement. The boys quickly filled in the gaps, and by Saturday night, the fort was complete, leaving them feeling confident in their ability to fend off any attack from the nearby squatters. Meanwhile, progress on the boat was nearing completion, though there was still about a week's worth of work left. "We need to caulk her seams," Tom suggested on Sunday as the boys gathered around their fire, "with moss instead of oakum, and then we'll coat her with pitch." "Speaking of which," replied Henry, "we need to make the pitch." "Do you know how to do this, Tom?" "Not really," Tom replied, "but I think we can figure it out." "I do," Sam said. "I've seen tar made in the tar-producing areas of North Carolina, and pitch is just boiled tar." "Great, then you'll oversee that task," Tom said. "You know our agreement. Each of us manages what he knows best. You'd better start making a lot of salt right away, beginning tomorrow morning." "Why, don't you use salt when making pitch?" "No, but I'll need the big kettle to boil the tar, and it won't be good for making salt after that." "In that case, we'll have to cook all our rice too," Henry added. "No, we don't need to do that," Tom said. "It would go bad if we did, and we can cook it as we need it in the coffee pot." The next morning, they began their preparations. Henry got his salt-making process underway, Tom worked on the boat, and Sam got ready for burning tar. He started by digging a pit about 4 feet square and 2 feet deep. Then, about a foot away, he dug another pit that was 3 feet square and 4 feet deep. He packed the wall of dirt between the two pits as tightly as he could, and then, using a long piece of cane for a tar pipe, he passed it through that wall, placing it at the bottom of the shallow pit. He angled it slightly downward so the tar could easily flow through and into the deeper pit. Once that part was done, Sam went into the woods near the camp to gather a large amount of fat pine for burning. He stacked this in the shallow pit and built it up 2 or 3 feet above ground level, then used a shovel to cover the pile with dirt about a foot deep, leaving just one opening to light the fire. His goal was to smother the flames in order to make the fat, resinous pine burn slowly. This way, he could create a roasting heat beneath the ground, effectively melting the tar out of the pine. If he hadn't covered the wood with earth, it would have flared up and burned completely, producing nothing but smoke, resin included, without yielding any tar. Once everything was prepared, he set the pile ablaze, and as soon as the flames caught well, Sam covered the single opening with soil, transforming the mound into a smoking entity reminiscent of a volcano. Before long, a stream of piping hot tar began to trickle through the cane tube into the deep pit. As night fell, the smoke rising from the tar kiln, illuminated by the campfire's glow, took on a peculiar red hue, lending a strange and picturesque atmosphere to the campsite. "You've created a little volcano, Sam," Henry remarked, gazing at the smoking mound. "Indeed, a step up from Mariner," Tom replied. "He didn't have a volcano on his island, but just look at how much smoke it produces. It's as though more is coming out of that mound than you originally put in as wood." "True, and a gallon of water can fill a large room if you turn it into steam." "What is smoke, anyway?" Henry asked. "It's made up of several things," Tom answered, "but it's mainly carbon. In fact, everything you see in smoke is carbon." "Then why doesn't it burn?" Henry queried. "It would, if it lingered in the fire long enough. But the light vapors that rise from the flames carry the carbon particles with them, so they escape the fire before they have a chance to fully ignite. The smoke is just wasted fuel, and there have been plenty of plans to harness it in factories where fuel costs are high." "There's a big waste in making tar, then," Henry remarked. "Not nearly as much as you think," Sam replied. "They don't waste the smoke up in the tar region of North Carolina." "What do you mean by that?" "They don't actually burn it. They collect it and sell it." "How do they manage that?" "Well, they have wire screens stretched over the tar kilns, and when the smoke hits them, the fine carbon particles cling to the screens. I've seen large clumps hanging down several inches from them, and they're quite beautiful, too." "But what do they do with it?" Henry inquired. "They sell it. It's called lamp black, and it sells for a pretty good price." "Now that's some smart economy, isn't it?" "Yes, but it's often these kinds of small margins that make manufacturing profitable. The tar-making areas up there are quite barren and desolate looking. I remember once passing through and hearing a man say, 'This is a place where nothing goes to waste. They strip the trees for resin, distill it to make turpentine, and the leftovers are rosin. When the trees die, they burn them for tar, capture the smoke for lamp black, and there aren't even any ashes left." Chapter 19. The tar flowed steadily on Monday night and throughout Tuesday, and by the end of the day, there was enough collected in the deep vat to produce all the pitch they needed. The salt-making process was complete too, leaving the large kettle ready for use the next day to boil the tar into pitch. That Tuesday evening, Tom decided to go fishing, as he did most nights when the tide was just right. He had figured out the best spots where the mullets tended to gather, and usually returned to camp with a decent catch. The boys had grown quite weary of their limited diet. For 3 weeks, they hadn't had meat of any kind since they never repeated their snake supper. They had survived on fish, shrimp, oysters, and a few crabs. Without bacon or any fat to fry their fish, they couldn't make their meals feel even slightly varied. Every meal had to be boiled, roasted, or broiled over the coals, and without butter or any seasoning for the broiled fish, everything began to taste the same. Their appetite for the food they could scavenge had faded, but with no alternatives, they had no choice but to eat it. That Tuesday night, Tom stayed away from camp longer than usual. Around 11 o'clock, Henry went to bed, leaving Sam on watch. About an hour later, Sam shook Henry awake. "I'm worried about Tom, Henry. It must be past midnight, and he still hasn't come back." Henry jumped up, and the two of them looked and listened intently. Finally, they decided that since Henry was still recovering from a dog bite and unable to run well, he should stay and keep watch while Sam would go looking for Tom. 10 minutes later, Sam returned quietly, hurrying through the eastern gate. Securing his gear, he exclaimed with urgency, "The squatters are closing in on us, and I think they've taken Tom." "Why, where are they? You've got to tell me everything fast." "I don't know much myself," replied Sam. "I just know that as I walked along the shore in the direction Tom went, I nearly tripped over one of the squatters. I backed away, of course, and by staying hidden in the bushes and listening, I figured out there are at least 6 of them around. Since I couldn't see or hear Tom anywhere, I'm afraid they might have caught him. They came right down the shoreline where he was wading and fishing, and if he hadn't been caught, he would have come running to warn us. Poor guy. I wonder if they'll kill him." "I'm more worried about what might happen to him," Henry said gravely. "What do you mean?" Sam asked. "I fear they'll beat him. That would be terrible. Honestly, I'd rather be killed, and I know Tom would too." "Yes, that's true," Sam agreed. After a moment he continued, "But we can't let that happen." "How are we supposed to stop it?" "Well, they won't try anything until after they've attacked the fort. They'll just tie Tom up and keep him until they finish with us, so we have time to create a distraction for his sake. We need to fight them outside the fort. If we can push them back, we might find Tom. Once he knows what's going on, he'll signal to us." "Yeah, unless they've taken him too far away by then," Henry said. "But we'll give it a shot. Where were the squatters when you spotted them?" "About 200 yards off, in the woods near the shore." "Okay. Now, let's remember that we need to stick together, and our goal is to do as little fighting as possible. We must get past the enemy if we can and continue down the shore in search of Tom. We shouldn't waste time on unnecessary conflicts." "No, let's first try to sneak past them without fighting at all," Sam suggested. Armed with their best clubs, the two boys quietly slipped out of the eastern gate and made their way through the woods as stealthily as they could. They spotted 2 squatters, but managed to slip by without being noticed. Once they were a safe distance away, they hurried along the beach, calling for Tom at the top of their lungs and listening intently for his response. Eventually, they heard a shout in return, but it sounded far off, and oddly enough, it came from the direction of the camp. When they turned around, they were struck with horror and disbelief at the sight before them. A massive red blaze was shooting up from the camp. "They're burning us out," Sam exclaimed. "Yes, and Tom must be with them, since his shout came from that way. Come on, let's run with all our strength. We might still make it in time to save Tom." They raced like deer and quickly reached the burning camp. They encountered 3 of the men outside, but catching them off guard allowed the boys to sprint past and enter the gate before their enemies could catch them. Once inside, they secured the gate log. As they turned, they realized they had trapped one of their attackers, a black boy no older than they were, inside the camp. This lad put up a fight, but with the 2 of them working together, they quickly subdued him and tied him with the boat's anchor rope. It was then that Sam and Henry had a moment to assess the extent of the damage done. Stockade remained intact, and so far the boat was safe, but the vat of tar had caught fire, and the bush hut where the boys slept was either ignited by the blazing tar or set ablaze by the black boy. It was clear they could do nothing to save the hut, even if they had been free to act, as the risk to the boat was far too great. The boat was dangerously close to the flames, and already beginning to scorch. Sam managed to salvage the salt from the hut, then he and Henry began soaking moss to cover the boat. "This isn't going to work, Sam," Henry said. "Those rascals outside will find a way over the stockade if we don't keep an eye on them. Can you keep the moss wet?" "Yes, I'll handle that. You head to the platform right away. If you need me, just shout, and I'll come." Henry rushed to the platform, and just in time. The black men outside, hearing the cries of their trapped companion, were already attempting to breach the enclosure. One had climbed on another's shoulders and was grasping the top of the stockade, ready to pull himself up. If he succeeded, the boys would have to confront him directly, and by then it's possible another squatter would have made it over the wall as well. Fortunately, the glow from the burning tar illuminated the scene for Henry in an instant. He sprinted along the platform to the point of danger and struck the climber's hands with enough force to send him tumbling back to the ground as if his hands had been severed. Without hesitation, Henry began to fight back. He hurled clubs one after another, having a substantial stash of them stored along the platform, forcing the intruders to retreat. They threw a few sticks at him in response, but he managed to dodge them. With Sam joining him for a few minutes, the two of them effectively drove off their attackers. Sam then returned to his task of guarding the boat, while Henry walked around the barrier, keeping an eye out for any surprises. With no further assaults coming and the fire slowly dying down, the boat was no longer in danger. This gave Sam and Henry a moment to think about Tom, and their worry was palpable. "At least we have a hostage," said Sam. "Maybe poor Tom can negotiate for an exchange. I really hope so. There must be some among them who speak English, and besides, Tom understands a bit of their language." "Let's hope for the best," Henry replied. "But shouldn't we make another effort to find Tom?" "I don't see what we can do," Sam said. "They've taken him by now, and chasing after them in the dark would be pointless." "You're right. Wait, did you hear that?" Sam strained to listen, but caught nothing. "What did you hear?" he asked. "I thought I heard Tom shout." Sam let out a loud, prolonged call, and they both listened earnestly. This time, a shout in response was clearly heard. "That's Tom," Henry exclaimed. "Yes," Sam replied. "He's causing as much trouble as he can to slow them down and give us a chance to catch up. Come on, Henry, we have to rescue him." Once more the boys set out, this time through the western gate. They raced along the shore, stopping now and then to shout out and listen for Tom's replies, which came quickly now. "They're not moving very fast with him," Sam said. "At least we're gaining on them." And with that, the boys took off running again. When they paused again to shout, they were surprised to hear Tom's voice call out from nearby, sounding completely natural. "Is everything burned up?" Oddly, the voice seemed to come from the water on their right, which left both Sam and Henry confused. "Where on earth are you?" Sam yelled. "I'm here," Tom replied, "out here on the oyster reef." The moon hung high in the sky, and by straining their eyes, the boys could just make out Tom standing knee-deep in the water, about 50 yards from shore. They had no idea what to think of the situation. "What are you doing out there, Tom?" Sam shouted. "I'm waiting for the tide to go down, but enough about me, tell me about the fire. Did it burn the boat?" "No, just the tar in the vat in our hut. The boat is fine, and so is the stockade." "How did it catch fire?" "The squatters set it ablaze, while we were out searching for you." "Have they been here, then?" "Yeah, haven't they taken you prisoner?" "Not at all. But don't just stand there talking. Head back and take care of the camp. When the tide goes down, I'll come back. Hurry, or those troublemakers will get back in and burn the boat." "But what on earth?" "Never mind that now. Go on to camp. You don't have a moment to waste. I'll explain everything when I get there." Understanding the urgency, Sam and Henry wasted no time and began a brisk trot toward the camp. Chapter 20. When Sam and Henry arrived at camp, everything was just as they had left it, except their prisoner was gone. A quick inspection revealed that he had chewed through the rope that had bound him and made his escape. Initially, the boys thought this was unfortunate, but a moment's thought led them to see it differently. "Now that we know Tom is safe," Henry said, "we really don't need that scoundrel anymore. We should have let him go in the morning anyway." "Speaking of which," Sam chimed in, "what do you think about Tom's escape plan?" "I can't figure it out at all," Henry replied. "He must have been cut off from camp by the squatters and had to take refuge out on the oyster reef." "No, the squatters came from the other direction, remember. Besides, Tom had no idea there were any squatters nearby until we told him. "I can clarify everything," Tom called from outside. "If you would kindly take down the gate log and let me in." They quickly complied, and Tom stepped in, pushing ahead a cast net brimming with fish. As he straightened, a joyous cheer erupted from his friends when they noticed the turtle in his hands, which must have weighed at least 25 pounds. "Hurrah, we'll finally have some meat. Where did you find that beauty, Tom?" "On the oyster reef," Tom replied. "That's why I was out there." "Well, tell us everything." "Oh, there's not much to tell. After I left camp, I walked east along the shore and caught a few fish, but not many. Then I decided to try the other side of the camp. I strung my fish on a flexible stick and headed back, planning to drop them off before moving on. But when I got closer, I saw the gate was shut, so I went around without bothering you guys and continued westward. I moved around, trying my luck at various spots, until I finally found a good place to fish in the shallow water between the oyster reef and the shore. It looked like the mullets were gathered there, swimming around like they were in a discussion. The tide was low and still coming in, leaving the oyster reef exposed. Since my catch was pretty impressive, and I was closer to the reef than the shore, I decided to take a peek over the reef, hoping to spot a small turtle. I had seen one out there a few days before, and the thought of having turtle meat made my mouth water. So I swung my string of fish over my shoulder and crept around in the moonlight, which was breaking through the trees at that hour. After searching for a while, I finally spotted the little guy making his way across the oyster bed. From how slowly he was moving, it looked like the sharp shells hurt his feet just like they hurt mine. But he picked up speed when he noticed me sneaking up. If I hadn't been so eager for some breakfast meat, he might have escaped. In my determination, I forgot all about my own sore feet and managed to catch him. Then I tried to make my way back to shore, but the tide had come in, and I found I couldn't wade to safety. Swimming would mean losing my turtle, so I decided to wait it out until the tide turned. I stood in water up to my waist at high tide, but that didn't bother me much. I only started to worry when I saw the fire at camp and heard you all yelling out. I called back, but when you stopped, I thought everything was fine. I waited another couple of hours until the fire began to die down. Then I heard you calling again, and you came to find me. You know the rest from there. I reached the shore as soon as the waves allowed me. Now, fill me in on everything that's happened here. Where's your captive?" The boys quickly filled me in on their escapades from the night before. "What kind of damage are we dealing with?" Tom asked when they finished their tale. "The hut's gone," Henry replied. "And so is the tar," Sam added. "We can build another hut in no time, but losing the tar just as we were ready to use it is a bigger problem." "Yeah, that'll set us back a couple more days with the boat," Tom lamented. "It's too bad. Let's see, it's Wednesday morning, nearly dawn now. If this hadn't happened, we might have been able to leave by next Wednesday, 4 weeks since we first arrived. Now it looks like we won't be setting off until the Friday or Saturday after that." "Well, that'll be the scheduled time," Henry said. "The scheduled time," Tom echoed, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "Don't you remember? You told Ma'am Lucy we'd be gone for a month, and she warned you not to stay a day longer than that." "Oh, right. I'd completely forgotten. How strange it will be if we leave on Saturday. I never thought we'd be here a week when we first came." "Me neither," Sam chimed in. "If we'd known what awaited us, I doubt we would have come at all." "I'm not so sure about that," Henry replied thoughtfully. "We came looking for adventure, and we definitely found it, as far as I can tell. And honestly, we've also had quite a bit of fun." "That's true," Tom said. "We couldn't expect to sleep on feather beds or have many comforts on this journey. And in the end, our little struggles haven't done us any harm. My foot is almost healed, and your dog bite, Henry, is mending nicely. So if we make it out okay, we might just be better for the experience." "It'll all seem like a good time once we're back at school and think about it," Sam said. "I dare say we've sharpened our wits a bit," replied Sam. "We've learned how to handle ourselves in the woods, and this experience will make us think faster and clearer." Well, it's evident we're not quite sharp enough yet, Henry observed. Otherwise, one of us would have noticed by now exactly what the fire has cost us. What do you mean, Henry? Every last grain of rice we had was in the hut, so it's all gone up in smoke. Good grief, Tom exclaimed. That's a disaster, Sam added, but we need to find more today. Yes, Tom agreed, if the squatters haven't taken it all. Let's not meet trouble halfway, Sam said. It's better to worry about the rice later, once we see we can't get any. In the meantime, let's have some turtle steak for breakfast. Then we'll figure out what to do next. Despite the absence of rice and any bread substitutes, the boys enjoyed the broiled turtle more than anything they had tasted in the last 2 weeks. After breakfast, they scouted the area to ensure there were no squatters nearby. Then Henry climbed a tall tree. The plan was for him to keep an eye out for squatters while Tom and Sam gathered rice, so they wouldn't be caught off guard. The rice had been mostly harvested already, with only a few clumps still standing in the grass and bushes around the patch. After a hard morning's labor, the boys managed to gather enough remnants to last them for 10 to 12 days.